Stranded in enemy territory. The evacuation alarm blared through the settlement as Lieutenant Jackson Hayes led his squad through the chaos. Rigel 4, once a promising human outpost on the edge of the Andromeda sector, was now falling to the Valtherian forces. "Keep moving," Jackson shouted over the din of distant explosions. The sky above them burned orange with anti-aircraft fire, silhouetting the massive Valtherian warships that had appeared without warning in the planet's orbit 3 hours ago. Private Weston stumbled, his armor clanking against the metal walkway. "Sir, they've cut off access to Docking Bay C." Jackson cursed under his breath, checking his tactical display. The blue dots representing friendly forces were dwindling across the map. "Reroute to Bay D. We've got 8 minutes before the last transports leave." They pushed through panicked civilians, the weight of their combat gear slowing them down as they navigated the crumbling infrastructure. A violent tremor shook the ground beneath them, and Jackson watched in horror as the walkway ahead began to collapse. "Jump," he ordered, leaping across the widening gap. His squad followed, but as Jackson turned to ensure everyone had made it, a deafening explosion ripped through the air. A blinding flash enveloped him, and then, darkness. When Jackson regained consciousness, silence had replaced the cacophony of battle. His head throbbed, and a quick systems check of his armor revealed multiple breaches. The tactical display flickered weakly, showing no friendly signals within range. "Squad, report," he croaked into his comm. Only static answered him. Rising painfully to his feet, Jackson surveyed his surroundings. He had landed in an abandoned section of the colony, far from the evacuation site. Smoke billowed from multiple structures, and in the distance, the silhouettes of Valtherian ground troops moved methodically through the ruins. His armor's chronometer showed that 4 hours had passed. The evacuation would be complete by now. He was stranded. "Focus, Hayes," he muttered to himself, checking his weapons. His rifle had survived with minimal damage, and he still had his sidearm. First priority, find shelter before a Valtherian patrol spotted him. Jackson moved cautiously through the debris, using the smoke for cover. He navigated toward what appeared to be an intact research facility, its reinforced structure having withstood the bombardment better than the residential areas. The facility's entrance was sealed, but a maintenance hatch on the lower level offered a way in. Jackson pried it open and slipped inside, finding himself in a darkened utility corridor. Emergency lighting cast a dim blue glow along the floor, guiding him deeper into the complex. As he moved through the facility, Jackson noted signs of a hasty evacuation, abandoned equipment, scattered research materials, and personal items left behind. He checked each room systematically, securing his position and searching for supplies. In the main laboratory, he discovered something unexpected, a holding cell, its force field still active despite the power fluctuations. Inside was a figure curled on the floor, distinctly non-human. Jackson approached cautiously, his rifle raised. The being inside was unmistakably Valtherian, tall and slender with iridescent skin that shifted between deep blue and purple. But unlike the Valtherian soldiers he'd encountered on the battlefield, this one wore no armor, only a simple garment that appeared to be some kind of research uniform. The Valtherian stirred, revealing large, multifaceted eyes that fixed on Jackson with unmistakable fear. Jackson noticed the dried blood on her side, and the restraints on her slender wrists. "You're a prisoner," Jackson realized aloud. "But you're Valtherian. Why would your own people?" The alien spoke, her voice melodic despite her obvious pain. "Not prisoner of my people. Prisoner of Blackstone." Jackson frowned. Blackstone was a private military contractor that often worked alongside human forces. "Blackstone captured you? Why?" The Valtherian struggled to sit up. "I am Nalera, xenobiologist. I discovered truth. About war. About." She winced, clutching her side. Jackson hesitated. Every instinct from his military training told him to keep his distance. The Valtherians had been humanity's enemies for 3 years, ever since the massacre at Nova Centauri. But something about this scenario didn't add up. "You're injured," he said finally, lowering his weapon slightly. "Yes. We'll die soon without medical aid." Nalera's multifaceted eyes studied him. "You are human soldier. You will leave me." Jackson should leave her. By all logic, he should focus on his own survival, find a way to signal for extraction, and complete his mission. But as he looked at the wounded alien, another memory surfaced, his grandfather's words from long ago: "What separates us from beasts isn't our technology, Jackson. It's our capacity for compassion, even toward those we're taught to fear." Making his decision, Jackson approached the control panel for the holding cell. "I'm Lieutenant Jackson Hayes, United Earth Marine Corps. And no, I'm not leaving you." With a few commands, he deactivated the force field. Nalera watched him warily as he entered the cell and knelt beside her. "Why help enemy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson examined her wound, a nasty energy weapon burn that had been poorly treated. "Maybe I'm tired of this war. Maybe I want answers about why Blackstone had you locked up. Or maybe I just don't like seeing anyone suffer, even if they're supposed to be my enemy." He reached into his medkit and removed a universal healing patch, designed to work with most known sentient species' physiologies. "This will hurt," he warned before applying it to her wound. Nalera hissed but remained still as the patch began its work, releasing nanites that would accelerate healing and fight infection. "We need to move," Jackson said, glancing at the laboratory entrance. "Valtherian forces are sweeping the settlement. And if Blackstone had you here, they might come back." "Cannot move quickly," Nalera responded, struggling to stand. Jackson made another decision that defied his training. He helped support the alien's weight, noting how light she was despite being nearly a head taller than him. "We'll move together. There must be a secure area deeper in this facility where we can regroup." As they made their way through the abandoned laboratory, an explosion rocked the building. Jackson steadied Nalera against a wall and peered around a corner to see armored figures entering the facility, not Valtherian troops, but Blackstone operatives in their distinctive midnight blue tactical gear. "They're back," he whispered. "Can you tell me quickly why they had you imprisoned?" Nalera's eyes shifted color, darkening with what Jackson interpreted as dread. "I discovered evidence. The conflict between humans and Valtherians, it was engineered. Blackstone and certain officials from both sides. Profit from war technology. Power from fear." Jackson processed this information, his world tilting. Could it be true? Had thousands died on both sides for corporate profit? Another explosion, closer this time. They needed to move. "There's a service tunnel that leads to the geothermal plant," Jackson said, recalling the colony layout from his briefing. "If we can reach it, we might find a way off-planet." Nalera nodded weakly. "I trust you, Lieutenant Hayes." Jackson almost laughed at the absurdity, an alien enemy placing her trust in him while his own people's corporation hunted them both. "Let's hope I deserve that trust." As they made their way deeper into the facility, avoiding Blackstone patrols, Jackson couldn't help but reflect on how quickly everything had changed. This morning, he had been a dedicated soldier following orders. Now he was a fugitive, helping an alien who claimed the entire war was based on a lie. Yet somehow, for the first time since the war began, his actions felt right. Whatever came next, whether they escaped or were captured, Jackson knew he wouldn't regret his choice to show compassion in a world that had forgotten its value. They reached a maintenance hatch that would lead them to the tunnels. As Jackson worked to open it, Nalera placed a slender hand on his armored shoulder. "Human compassion," she said softly. "In my studies, I read it was your species' greatest strength. Now I understand." Jackson smiled grimly as the hatch opened, revealing the dark passage that represented their only hope of escape. Let's hope it's enough to keep us alive. Together, human and Valtherian disappeared into the darkness, fugitives united by an act of kindness that would soon change the course of a war, and perhaps the fate of both their civilizations. Unlikely alliance. The service tunnel stretched ahead of them like a throat of darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of emergency lighting strips along the floor. Jackson's armor systems had partially recovered, providing a dim tactical display that showed nothing but static beyond a few meters. The thick walls were blocking most signals. "We should be safe for now," Jackson said, helping Nalera lean against the curved wall of the tunnel. Her breathing had become labored, the healing patch on her side glowing with faint blue bioluminescence as it worked to repair her damaged tissue. "Your medical technology is impressive," Nalera observed, her multifaceted eyes shifting to a shade of amber that Jackson was beginning to associate with curiosity. "On my world, we would use symbiotic organisms for such healing." Jackson checked his weapon systems while keeping an ear out for pursuit. "Sounds more advanced than patches, actually. We're still figuring out a lot of xenobiology." "Perhaps," Nalera said with what Jackson interpreted as a smile, a subtle change in the pattern of light reflecting off her iridescent skin. "Or perhaps just different paths to the same destination." The philosophical bent of her comment surprised Jackson. The military briefings had always portrayed Valtherians as coldly logical, lacking the emotional complexity of humans. Just one of many things they might have gotten wrong, he was beginning to realize. "Can you walk?" he asked, noticing that the patch had stabilized her vitals according to his med scanner. Nalera pushed herself up, standing more steadily than before. "Yes. The pain has lessened." "Where do we go now, Lieutenant Hayes?" "Jackson," he corrected automatically. "Rank seems a bit pointless when we're both fugitives." He consulted his neural map of the settlement. The geothermal plant connects to an auxiliary landing pad used for maintenance. If we're lucky, there might still be a shuttle there. They moved deeper into the tunnel system, Jackson leading with his rifle ready while Nalera followed close behind. The silence between them was broken only by the distant rumble of explosions above ground and the occasional drip of condensation from pipes overhead. "You mentioned Blackstone engineered the conflict," Jackson said finally, keeping his voice low. "I need to understand what you meant by that." Nalera was quiet for several moments before responding. 3 years ago, when your colony at Nova Centauri was destroyed, this was blamed on Valtherian extremists, yes? "It was the catalyst for the war," Jackson confirmed. 10,000 civilians killed in a surprise attack. My cousin was among them. "I am sorry for your loss," Nalera said with genuine softness in her tone. "But it was not Valtherian forces responsible for that attack. I discovered communication logs, financial transfers, and planning documents. The Nova Centauri massacre was orchestrated by Blackstone operatives disguised as Valtherians, with the knowledge of certain high-ranking officials in your government." Jackson stopped walking, turning to face her. "That's a serious accusation. Why would our own people do that?" "The simplest reason, profit." Nalera's eyes darkened to a deep indigo. "Blackstone's revenue has increased 15-fold since the war began. Military contracts, security services, weapons development. And certain political figures gained considerable power by rallying humans against a common enemy." "And your government?" Jackson asked, his mind racing to process the implications. "They must have known the truth." "Some did," Nalera admitted. "Just as in your species, there are those who benefit from conflict. Our military-industrial complex expanded greatly, and those who questioned the war were silenced, like me." They reached a junction in the tunnel, and Jackson checked both directions before choosing the path that sloped gently downward, toward the geothermal plant. As they walked, he grappled with Nalera's revelations. If what she said was true, he had been fighting in a manufactured war, watching friends die for corporate profits and political advancement. "You have proof of this?" he asked finally. "I did. Data crystals containing all the evidence. Blackstone took them when I was captured, but I managed to hide one." From a hidden pocket in her garment, she withdrew a small crystalline object that glowed with a pulsing inner light. "This contains enough to expose the truth to both our peoples." A sudden tremor shook the tunnel, dislodging dust and small fragments of concrete from above. Jackson instinctively stepped closer to Nalera, shielding her as debris rained down. "They're bombing the infrastructure," he explained grimly. "Standard procedure when abandoning a position, deny resources to the enemy. Even at the cost of knowledge?" Nalera asked, gesturing to the research facility they had left behind. "Your species values data and discovery as much as mine. To destroy it seems wasteful." "War makes people do wasteful things," Jackson replied, thinking of all the deaths, on both sides, that could have been avoided. "Come on, we need to keep moving." They continued in silence until they reached a massive circular chamber, the geothermal monitoring station. Steam hissed from pressure valves, and the air was thick with heat and moisture. Jackson's armor immediately began compensating, cooling systems whirring to life, but he noticed Nalera seemed more comfortable in the humid environment. "Your species prefers this climate?" he asked, seeking a path across the chamber to the exit on the far side. "Valthos is warmer and more humid than Earth," she explained. "This feels almost like home." The wistfulness in her voice reminded Jackson that she was as stranded as he was, possibly even more alienated. At least he was on a human settlement, surrounded by familiar technology and design. Before they could cross the chamber, Jackson's tactical display flashed a warning: movement detected ahead. He pulled Nalera behind a large conduit pipe just as a squad of armored figures entered from the far door. "Blackstone," Jackson whispered, recognizing the midnight blue armor. "Heavy tactical unit." Through the steam, he counted 6 operatives, each armed with advanced weapon systems that outclassed his standard military gear. The squad leader was gesturing, clearly organizing a search pattern. "They must have tracked us somehow," Jackson muttered. Beside him, Nalera tensed. "My physiology," she whispered. "Valtherians emit a distinct electromagnetic signature when stressed or injured. Their scanners are likely calibrated to detect it." Jackson quickly assessed their options. The chamber had multiple levels of walkways and pipes, offering plenty of cover but also limiting escape routes. The Blackstone operatives were blocking their direct path to the auxiliary landing pad. "I need a distraction," he decided, checking his remaining equipment. Among his gear was a small drone used for reconnaissance, damaged in the explosion but possibly still functional. "If I can get this working, we might have a chance." While Nalera kept watch, Jackson quickly reprogrammed the drone, bypassing its damaged communication systems and setting it to follow a simple patrol route that would draw attention away from their position. With a soft whir, the small device activated, its lights blinking erratically due to the damage. "When I release this, we'll have maybe 30 seconds before they realize it's a decoy," Jackson explained. "There's a maintenance ladder on the north wall that should take us to the upper level. From there, we can reach the emergency exit that leads to the landing pad." Nalera nodded. "I will follow your lead." Jackson launched the drone, sending it on a zigzagging path across the open area of the chamber. Almost immediately, the Blackstone operatives reacted, their weapons tracking the movement. "Now," Jackson whispered, and they moved quickly along the periphery of the chamber, using the pipes and steam for cover. They had almost reached the ladder when a shout echoed across the space. "Contact! North Quadrant!" A barrage of energy weapons fire cut through the steam toward them. Jackson pushed Nalera ahead of him toward the ladder. "Climb! I'll cover you." As Nalera ascended, Jackson took up a defensive position, returning fire with measured bursts from his rifle. The exchange was brief but intense. He managed to hit one operative, sending them stumbling back, but the others were advancing methodically, using their superior numbers to flank his position. When Nalera reached the top of the ladder, Jackson fired one last volley and turned to follow her. Halfway up, a shot grazed his leg, burning through the armor and searing the flesh beneath. He grunted in pain but continued climbing, pulling himself onto the upper walkway where Nalera waited. "You're injured," she observed, concern evident in her voice. "I'll live," Jackson responded, applying a quick med seal to the wound. "But we need to keep moving." They ran along the walkway, pursuing a route that wound through a maze of pressure tanks and control stations. Below them, the Blackstone operatives were regrouping, some climbing to pursue while others maintained positions to cut off potential escape routes. The emergency exit was marked with faded signs in multiple languages. Jackson hit the release mechanism, but nothing happened. Power to this section must have been cut during the attack. "Manual override," he muttered, locating the emergency handle recessed in the wall. It took both of them pulling with all their strength to slide the heavy door open enough to squeeze through. Beyond was a narrow passage that sloped upward, eventually emerging onto the auxiliary landing pad, a small platform jutting from the side of the cliff face upon which the settlement had been built. True to Jackson's hopes, a single maintenance shuttle sat on the pad, apparently overlooked in the chaos of the evacuation. "That's our ticket out of here," Jackson said, allowing himself a moment of optimism as they approached the craft. The shuttle was an older model, designed for atmospheric work rather than deep space travel, but it would suffice to get them off-planet. Jackson accessed the control panel, relieved when it lit up with standby power. "Can you pilot this?" Nalera asked, keeping watch for pursuers. "Basic flight training is standard for Marines," Jackson replied, initiating the startup sequence. "It won't be the smoothest ride, but—" An explosion rocked the landing pad, sending them both sprawling. Through the smoke emerged the Blackstone squad leader, his armor more elaborate than his companions, featuring additional tactical systems and a high-powered rifle aimed directly at them. "Lieutenant Hayes," the man's voice was artificially amplified through his helmet speakers. "Step away from the alien and the shuttle. This doesn't have to end badly for you." Jackson positioned himself between Nalera and the operative. "I think we're past that point, don't you? Especially considering what I now know about Nova Centauri." The squad leader paused, his helmet tilting slightly. "So she told you her conspiracy theory. And you believed an alien over your own kind? That's disappointing." "What's disappointing is learning that 10,000 of our people died to start a profitable war," Jackson replied, his hand slowly reaching for his sidearm. His rifle had been lost in the explosion. "Complicated situations require decisive solutions, Lieutenant. History will vindicate the difficult choices made." The squad leader advanced a step. "Now, I won't ask again. The Valtherian comes with us. You can walk away." Behind him, Jackson heard the shuttle's engines cycling to full power. Nalera must have continued the startup sequence while he kept the operative distracted. He needed just a few more seconds. "You know I can't do that," Jackson said. "Then you'll die here with her." The squad leader raised his weapon. Jackson drew and fired in one fluid motion, years of combat training guiding his aim. The shot struck the operative's weapon, damaging its firing mechanism but not disabling it completely. The distraction was enough for Jackson to dive to the side as return fire scorched the platform where he had been standing. Rolling to his feet, Jackson fired again, this time hitting the squad leader's shoulder joint, where the armor was thinner to allow for movement. The man staggered but didn't fall. "Jackson!" Nalera called from the shuttle's open hatch. "It's ready." More Blackstone operatives were emerging onto the landing pad. Jackson backed toward the shuttle, firing controlled bursts to keep them at bay. As he reached the hatch, a shot clipped his armor, spinning him around. He fell into the shuttle as Nalera slammed the hatch control. "Can you fly?" he asked through gritted teeth, his side burning where the shot had penetrated his armor. "Basic principles are similar to our vessels," Nalera replied, taking the pilot's seat with surprising confidence. "Hold on." The shuttle lifted off, rocking violently as it took fire from the operatives on the pad. Nalera piloted with unexpected skill, quickly putting distance between them and the settlement. Through the viewport, Jackson watched as Rigel 4 fell away beneath them, the once thriving outpost now a burning ruin. "Where to?" Nalera asked, stabilizing their ascent as they broke atmosphere. Jackson considered their options. They couldn't return to Earth or any major human outpost, not with Blackstone likely having already labeled him a traitor. Similarly, Valtherian territory would be dangerous for both of them. "There's a neutral trading post in the Draconis system," he decided. "It's run by the consortium, they don't ask questions as long as you can pay. We can refuel there and figure out our next move." Nalera nodded, programming the coordinates. As the shuttle's faster-than-light drive engaged, casting strange shadows across her iridescent features, she turned to Jackson. "You were wounded protecting me," she observed, her eyes shifting to a concerned violet hue. "Why risk so much for someone you were taught to hate?" Jackson winced as he adjusted his position, the med seal on his side already working to repair the damage. "Maybe I'm just bad at following orders," he joked weakly. Then, more seriously, "or maybe I'm tired of hating based on differences I don't even understand." Nalera was quiet for a moment, studying him with her alien gaze. Finally, she said, "On Valthos, we have a concept called Shiraneth, the moment when truth changes one's path irrevocably. I believe this is your Shiraneth, Jackson Hayes." As the stars stretched into lines around them, Jackson couldn't help but agree. Something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of the universe and his place in it. Whatever came next, whether vindication or persecution, he knew he could never return to the comfortable ignorance of before. "Get some rest," Nalera advised, monitoring the shuttle systems. "We have approximately 12 hours before we reach Draconis. I will wake you if there are any problems." Jackson nodded, allowing himself to relax slightly for the first time since the evacuation alarm had sounded. As he drifted toward an exhausted sleep, he reflected that 24 hours ago, he would never have imagined trusting his life to a Valtherian. Now, stranded with her between worlds, trust was all they had. The shuttle carried them through the void, two unlikely allies bound by circumstance and choice, a human soldier who had chosen compassion over duty, and an alien scientist whose truth had cost her everything. Together, they flew toward an uncertain future, carrying with them the secret that could end a war that should never have begun.